Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Kremlin has accused the UK of being unfriendly to business after Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich reportedly had problems with renewing his visa. Our diplomatic editor Dominic Waghorn is in central London for us. Where is he and when's he going to get it, if at all, Dominic?
Well, Roman Abramovich is apparently in Russia. He's waiting for his visa to be renewed. It's an investor visa, which means he could have paid or promised to pay a cool £1 million for it when he originally got it, or invest that in the British economy. If you do so, then you get a visa. So you effectively, with £1 million in those days, you could buy the right to live and work in the UK. Now, it's gone up to £2 million. And other rule changes have been applied since his original application and receipt of a visa, and what he's doing now, which is renewing it, applying for renewal. Now, he's doing that from outside of the UK, which is more complicated, we're told, than doing it within the UK. That may be part of it, but also he may be dealing with those new rules. So Downing Street and the Foreign Office have both said they can't go into individual cases, but Downing Street in its briefing this afternoon has pointed out those rules have changed, and therefore, for instance, you have to, as I say, show that you've got £2 million you can put into the British economy, but also clearly he's got a lot more than that, and he's put a lot more into the British economy. But he also has to prove that it's in a certain type of bank account, the money he has. He has to also prove it's not been acquired through ill-gotten means. So he may be having to do that. It's clearly a more complicated bureaucratic process, but you would have thought he and his immigration lawyers would have worked all that out before. Whatever it is, there's been a delay. And you have to say, whatever the reasons behind it, Kate, it does serve a certain purpose for the British government at the site of a well-known oligarch and tycoon very close to Vladimir Putin, finding it harder to get his visa renewed in what the government is trying to project, at least, as a trickier climate for people trying to get these visas, in particular Russians, in the light of the Skripal affair. But exactly the reason for the delay isn't clear yet. And also, I think what isn't clear is how long this is going to take and whether Abramovich is in serious trouble in trying to get the right to work and live in the UK renewed.
OK, for now, thanks.
Now, the British government is being accused of turning a blind eye to Russian money coming into the UK, according to a new report out today by the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. They argue that despite tougher talk following the poisoning of Russian ex-spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter in Salisbury at the beginning of March, it is still business as usual, and London was being used to hide corrupt assets of President Vladimir Putin and his allies. The report goes on to say that failing to crack down is putting Britain's national security at risk and calls for the gaps in the sanctions regime to be closed. Well, I am joined now by Duncan Hames from the anti-corruption organisation Transparency International and, of course, in a former life, a Liberal Democrat MP. So, Duncan Hames, how much Russian money is coming into the UK?
Well, it's impossible to know, but the National Crime Agency just a couple of weeks ago in their strategic assessment of serious and organised crime in the UK said it was a realistic possibility that money laundering in the UK, not just from Russia, could be occurring at a level of hundreds of billions of pounds. So this is not trivial by any means.
And when you say money laundering, where is that money eventually ending up? What is it being used for?
Well, an asset class that's particularly favoured, especially by Russian oligarchs, is UK real estate. So property, often prime residential property in central London. We've identified £4.4 billion worth of property assets in the UK that are purchased with suspicious wealth.
And what is the problem with that? Because I'm sure, you know, we can't say that all of this money comes from dubious sources. So there are many Russian millionaires, billionaires buying property in London. Not all of that money can be corrupt money, can it?
I totally accept that. But that which is, we should not be welcoming here. Transparency International is an anti-corruption campaign corruption is not a victimless crime. There are people all around the world denied health services, education, simply a fair chance in life because of corruption. And therefore it's very important that we shouldn't allow those that have grown wealthy on corruption impunity here in our country.
So what do you make of the government's efforts thus far to clamp down on this sort of behaviour?
Well, we've had some very welcome measures recently, the unexplained wealth orders that we called for in the Criminal Finances Act, and the decision by the House of Commons just the other week on the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Bill to require Britain's offshore financial centres to open up their company registers so that we might know who are the people behind those companies, as this is an essential tool for those seeking to provide some distance between their original crimes and the assets they now enjoy. These anonymous companies are, if you like, the getaway cars of some of the greatest thefts the world's ever seen.
So a major problem, and despite a lot of the talk, Ben Bradley, following the Skripal poisoning, you know, this report finding that not enough is being done. Well,
I think, you know, Theresa May's been pretty robust with Russia in particular since Skripal and Syria and everything else, and that changing international situation. When it comes to money laundering in particular, we've pointed out some of the legislation that's going through almost literally right now in terms of that power to go and investigate unexplained wealth and to have that explanation of, you know, where has this money come from and how has it come into our country. And I think it's something in the region of 2.2 billion that's been recovered through various new legislation and recovering that money from dodgy sources.
But the report says it's effectively business as usual. So do you accept that?
Well, it can't be business as usual at the same time as we're passing new legislation with welcome new powers. I mean, I'm not going to. I've not dug into the details of their report, but that particular language wouldn't fit with the fact that we have got new legislation to try and crack down on this.
The register of who really owns the foreign companies that own property in the UK is overdue. The government had promised to introduce legislation for it by last month. We're now being told to expect a draft bill, essentially another consultation of this this summer. The committee, in their report, one of their recommendations is that the government should review the timetable for introducing that legislation with a view to expediting it. The longer we wait, we should not have to wait 3 years before we know who owns these companies that own parts of our own country. I
mean, that's pretty clear. We should not have to wait.
Well, obviously that conversation will go on. The committee will have published that report. I'm sure government will look at it closely. We've got to get these things right, ultimately. As you said, not every penny that comes in from Russia or everywhere else is dodgy. Or we've seen, you know, things with visas for Mr. Abramovich and all that this morning. I'm sure is perfectly legitimate. But actually, we've got to crack down on you know, the foreign wealth that's coming that's not welcome. But that doesn't mean a blanket, you know, we will not accept investment in the UK. So there's got to be a line there somewhere that fits.
Jess Phillips, do you accept the government, since the Skripal poisoning, the government has actually taken steps to try and address some of these issues?
I mean, yes, the government legislatively have, they're really good, the government, at putting things down on goat skin, and much worse at actually making anything actually mean anything. And what we hear of as, you hear about draft bills in all sorts of areas of legislation now, while the entire bandwidth is taken up with Brexit, very little progress can be made in what actually will make a difference.
But legislation is legislation, so are you saying that that doesn't matter?
Well, of course it matters to make action on the ground, but you then actually have to make the action on the ground, and that needs resource. And that is often where this government falls down. They'll say, yeah, we'll make this amazing domestic abuse bill. Yes, we'll make this amazing bill on foreign money. But it actually means investing in services to make sure that that means something, and whether that's extra police number, extra tax officials, that never ever seems to come to fruition, and so you're left waiting with good intentions. Good intentions won't stop these people buying billion-pound houses in London. Good intentions won't save people's lives, and it's just PR.
Do you think your leader would endorse this report? Because of course he faced a lot of criticism after the poisonings in Salisbury for not taking a hard enough line on Russia.
Well, I don't think he did take a hard enough line on Russia. However, one thing that I think that he is fairly keen on is very, very rich Russians. You know, no fan of multi-billionaires is anyone in my party, really. But yeah, no, I think that it's a fair criticism that people felt his position on Russia at the time of the poisonings could have been clearer.
OK. And Duncan, what would you like to see happen now? We've got this report. It's out there. People are going to be talking about it. What would you like to see happening next?
Oh, well, we are very pleased with the recommendation that we should accelerate this property register. The Home Office has also said that it is conducting an internal review of the investor visa system, which we welcome. We published a set of concerns about the money laundering risk of that scheme, but there was a blind faith period for 7 years during which you could get an investor visa without having already gone through the money laundering checks to get a British bank account. So we think the government needs to look over all of these wealthy investors that it's given this fast track to the UK's immigration system to, and do the checks that were missed over quite an extensive period of time. Over 700 Russians secured investor visas during that period. And when the new rules were brought in 2015 to tighten up that system, the number of applicants for those visas from Russia and China in particular dropped off completely. And we don't know who these people were. In Malta, of all places, they published the names of who were awarded investor visas and sold passports, but not in the United Kingdom. That information is a secret.
OK, well, Duncan Hames from Transparency International, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Britain's anger at the poisoning of former Russian agent was supposed to have made life harder for allies of President Putin in Britain. But a committee of MPs says it is still business as usual for Russians wanting to launder what it called dirty money. It accuses the government of turning a blind eye to money that is being used to undermine our allies and our own national security.
Despite the government promises of a crackdown, the flow of Russian money into the city hasn't stopped, financing the purchase of some of London's best addresses, oiling the art market and keeping the super yachts afloat. According to MPs, it's still business as usual in the city.
Time is running on and we must get on with this. This is a very, very important issue for the UK, not just about financial crime. This isn't just about tax evasion, as important as that is. This is actually about national security. This money is being used not only to weaken ourselves, but is also being used to destabilise and undermine allies, most notably across Europe, of course, but actually around the world too.
After the nerve agent attack in Salisbury, the government promised tough sanctions on President Putin's cronies and on Russian money in the city. But on the same day that Britain announced it would be expelling 23 Russian diplomats, the energy company Gazprom used London's money markets to raise over £650 million. Business as usual, the Russian embassy asked in a tweet. And just a few days later, the Russian Finance Ministry raised £3.5 billion on London's markets.
This is a national security issue. The United Kingdom has been effectively facilitating money laundering on a global scale, on an industrial scale. We are allowing this money to be washed through our system.
The Prime Minister today denied the government was turning a blind eye.
We've taken greater powers for the UK to be able to act against criminal finances, and we will ensure that we do so. Obviously, where we're talking about criminal finances, we're talking about law enforcement taking their actions, and they must do so on an operational and independent basis.
One oligarch who is having trouble with business as usual, although there's no suggestion of wrongdoing, is Roman Abramovich. The Chelsea owner has been unable to return to Britain after his visa renewal was delayed. The government will not comment on Mr. Abramovich's case, but it is reviewing the type of visa that he holds. And on the day that it's accused of not doing enough to target Russian money, it doesn't harm the government to look as though even Britain's best-known oligarch is facing tougher scrutiny. Romilly Weeks, News at 10 at the Home Office.
Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich seems to be the latest victim of a hostile environment policy towards immigration. He's having trouble renewing his visa, reportedly. It's thought that tougher checks over the origins of incomers' wealth could be one cause of the apparent delay. Now, theoretically, things are meant to become more serious here for oligarchs since the poisoning of the Skripals 11 weeks ago. But a report by the Foreign Affairs Committee of MPs published today says the government has allowed business as usual to carry on in London. Our political editor Nick Watt is here. Nick, what do you know about this? Roman Abramovich case.
Yeah, so I understand that his visa ran out in early April. Now, he was not in the UK when that happened, which means that he has to apply from Russia, and that is a more complex process. And he faces two challenges. Firstly, the rules for these Tier 1 investor visas have been tightened up since 2015. And secondly, the Home Office is taking a much closer look at Russian applicants since the Salisbury attack. And the upshot of that is that Roman Abramovich may have to account for the source of his wealth in applying for this visa. It's important to say this is not targeting him. This is applying, and these rules are applying to all applicants from the Russian Federation.
A new policy. I mean, what is the government trying to achieve here, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's important to talk in wider terms, not about Roman Abramovich, about that Foreign Affairs Select Committee report today on what they say is the government's failure to deal with Russian corruption. And there was criticism for the government for delaying the introduction of legislation for a register of owners of overseas companies that own or purchase properties in the UK. Criticism that is not going to be operational until 2021. As I understand it, the government is saying today, certainly told me that they would like that to be up and running by 2020. But interestingly, there is a debate going on in government. I was talking to one minister who said that things are sort of eerily quiet on the Russian front, and what this minister said is that Moscow is biding its time for the World Cup. Let that happen. And then this minister said Russia will be after the UK, not through traditional warfare, but through warfare through the internet. And this minister, who would know Russian capabilities, said, for example, they have the ability and may well decide, for example, to stop the City of London functioning.
Nick, well, with me now, Vladimir Ashurkov, the Executive Director of the Anti-Corruption Foundation, which is led by Alexei Navalny. Vladimir was granted political asylum in the UK after facing prosecution in Russia. Charges, he says, are politically motivated. Also with us is the founder of the dating app, Huggle, Valerie Stark, who came from Russia to the UK. And Valerie, you're concerned that all Russians are being tarred by this idea that there's something dodgy about anybody who's got money and is Russian here.
I mean, not every single Russian is targeted. Obviously, it's all about experiences. And not every single British is saying bad things about Russians, but I can only speak for myself and for my friends, I guess. And in my experience, I started to get a lot of negative comments, especially since this Skripal case happened. And I understand that it's coming from, you know, all the media speculations and everything, what you see on the telly. If you know nothing about Russians but apart from what you see on the telly, what else, you know, can you know? And if you have no Russian friends, you don't work with any Russian people together, obviously that's all you know.
But let me ask you this, because no one wants a whole gang of people or a whole race or nationality of people to be stereotyped or generalised.
Of course not.
But do you think, of the very wealthy Russians who came here, and do not mention names, do you think on the whole it is clean money or dirty money or on the edge money? How should we look at Russians here?
I think you need to, I think that government need to take care of this. I cannot feel anything about that. If the money is dirty, you need to get rid of it. If not, then that's fine. So it's not up to me to decide.
Right, OK. Vladimir, do you think, I mean, presumably you think it is reasonable for the British to say, look, actually, we should ask questions about the origin of the money, because if it's corruptly obtained, then we should know about that, and we maybe don't give you a visa, right?
Absolutely, and Britain has quite robust anti-corruption, anti-money laundering legislation, the Bribery Act, the Proceeds of Crime Act. But until recently, the government was quite reluctant to use the instrument that it has. Maybe now the political environment is changing and the British authorities will be less tolerant to the dirty money coming into the UK from Russia and from other countries.
What do you think we should do? I mean, do you put any time limit on it? Do you think we should be very rigid about this? I mean, obviously, you might say it's not up to the UK to enforce Russian laws, and if Russia sold its assets in the 1990s at stupidly low prices to some people, that was, you know, that's not a British problem and not one for us to get involved in now. I don't know. What do you...
Well, I think the British government has to be transparent. Let's take the same case of Mr. Abramovich. Just denying a visa to a foreigner with unexplained grounds seems like a weak response to potential corruption.
So just to be clear, we don't think he's been denied a visa. There's obviously they're just going through the application. But go ahead, yeah.
But I think cases like Mr. Abramovich, Mr. Usmanov, other Russian oligarchs, they have to be investigated, and British authorities have all the instruments to do it.
Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't understand how they got here in the first place then. So British government was fine with them getting here, and we're not asking questions.
We've not bothered to ask any questions.
Who then you accuse then, if at the first place you
no one's been accused, but it's whether it's right for us to now say, look, we've probably been a bit of a soft touch. Should ask the questions and see whether people have got good answers.
We're asking questions of the British government.
I mean, I think that, yeah.
Yes, so I don't understand this. You can't say that the person is not guilty and then 10 years later say, well, actually you are.
Well, I don't know. It seems to me that the question was never asked and now it's being asked. But do you detect a change, Vladimir? Do you feel like the British government is now taking this more seriously? Because certainly there's been a big contrast with the Americans, who list names and have affected companies in the UK by American sanctions that we just very happily running along with.
Well, there has been a lot of strong rhetoric, but we haven't seen any action. It is common knowledge that the UK has become a safe haven for dirty money from Russia, from other countries, and the British authorities were turning a blind eye to it. Maybe now the situation will change.
Would we be right? Does it matter when crimes were committed? I mean, how far back do we have to look into people's careers? And what's your...
Let's look at individual case. Our foundation has uncovered a case in...
Because the people are not here to defend themselves, I just don't want you to get us into legal trouble by mentioning names. But you've looked at cases and...
We've looked at cases where cases of Russian corruption with UK nexus, when Russian businessmen have properties here, they're majority owners of companies that are quoted on London Stock Exchange, they are involved in corrupting foreign officials in Russia and in other countries. We're bringing these cases to the attention of Serious Fraud Office, of the financial regulators. We never get any response.
You don't get a response when you bring attention to them. And Valerie, you say your friends and you sort of feel, and your experiences, that you've been, you know, blackened with the media impressions given by Russia. Yes. But you do acknowledge that there is a lot of that. And what
I understand, but I get negative comments predominantly from people who don't know me, don't know any Russians. You know, it's not. I have lovely British friends, lovely Russian friends, and I feel quite happy in UK. You know, but what I don't like is that without any ground and without any evidences or any decisions made by government, people claim that every single Russian in UK is corrupt, and that's what I don't like. And even, you know, what you just said, just Russians corrupt a lot of businessmen with a lot of money, and I would like people to be very precise about who they accuse. You know, so there is no stereotyping involved.
You agree on that?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you both very much indeed. Thank you very much.
So on the other side of the coin, Roman Abramovich, the UK's tough stance on Russia, is that also showing that he can't get a visa now, or at least it's been delayed, or do you not think so?
Well, the way we've always treated Russia is ultimately we're not willing to get to the point where we really test Putin's resolve in numerous areas, either in the attempted murder in Salisbury or his behaviour in supporting Assad. We always do say we are willing to impose some sanctions, but London runs on dirty Russian money. The London super housing bubble runs on dirty Russian money. We know that ultimately, will Putin be willing to countenance aggression in the face of things? Yes, we do. Are we willing to respond with aggression? No, we're not.
But ultimately, all oligarchs have a relationship of some sort with Putin, all Russian oligarchs. It is not possible to be a functioning Russian oligarch without some degree of closeness. So, you know, this would be one way of sending a message. But
yeah, I mean, how long is Abramovich going to be kept out of?
I don't know, but I love the sentence. Flight records show his Boeing 767-300 left the UK on the 1st of April. Who's got a Boeing to their name? Nobody else.
It's the world's tiniest violin. We can just hear playing. Abramovich is slightly delayed.
I'm stuck in Russia with my jet. Giant jet.